Hi everyone, welcome back to Sounds of Voltage, my second channel. This video is a continuation of my main channel series on FM synthesis. I'm expanding on a video I made over there about FM self-modulation. In that main video, I looked at a standard sine wave and what happens when it FM oscillates itself. And I had also done some tests against triangle and pulse waves, but that video is getting a bit long, and really I'm just trying to focus on plain old sine waves for most of that series, so I figured it would fit over here. If you found your way to this video first, you might want to check that out before this one. There's a link in the description, but I'll quickly recap what I found. Starting with zero modulation, I slowly turned it up, and immediately we saw that the pitch started to drop. At the same time, the character of the sound started to change, getting a bit richer than the original sine wave that had a single frequency component. It now had a full set of harmonics, just like a real boy. When the modulation was fairly deep, we saw this, where it seemed like the modulation had made the waveform change by rushing up towards its maximum value, and then when it got to the bottom, it turned that into a trough that extended. It was indeed modulating the frequency, it was just doing it in the moment, one audio wavelength at a time. That change in the waveform dropped the pitch, and generated new additional sidebands which ended up forming a real harmonic series above the fundamental frequency, which is what the original carrier turned into. Sine waves occur as the building blocks of sound, but they're not necessarily the most interesting sound, and lots of oscillators don't even have a sine wave output. So let's try a triangle wave now. Triangles only have every second harmonic, and they drop off very rapidly, so it can be kind of sine-like. I'm set up here to use linear FM, and I'm starting with a 440 Hz triangle wavenet. And we get sort of the same behavior. The pitch shifts down, the waveform changes. In this case, it's kind of neat. The triangle keeps its triangleness towards the top and sort of turns into an extended sine wave at the bottom. Checking the spectrum, we can see all those sparse harmonics when we started, and then it's kind of interesting. We see the second harmonic fill itself in, and then more harmonics come sliding in from the side. The increase in the number of harmonics isn't surprising, because we're increasing the modulation, and we've seen before that the more we modulate, the more sidebands we get. So while the pitch is dropping, we see the harmonic/sidebands slide downward to maintain the right distance from the carrier/fundamental. Additional ones slide in from the right because more modulation means more sidebands. Cool. One last example. What about a square or a pulse wave? Now things get interesting. So far what we've seen is the waveform sort of rushing up towards the top to a peak at its maximum voltage, and then sliding down in an extended trough. But what's going to happen to a waveform that has instantaneous changes, just jumping between the voltage levels? It's hard to rush up when it's already instant after all. Okay, I have a pulse wave here. The duty cycle is a little more than 50%, and let's start to turn up the modulation. Wait, did you hear that? The pitch went up, and then after a bit, it turned around and headed back down like we've seen before. And as part of that, watch what happens to the duty cycle. It actually changes how long the waveform stays high for. In fact, it's kind of turning itself into a proper 50% duty cycle, before then extending its time at the low point. And from this point on, the time it spends at the top of the wave stays proportional to the frequency, while the time at the bottom extends. That's weird, but harmonically what happened? Interestingly, we see all the harmonics, all the multiples of that fundamental frequency, but their amplitudes keep going up and down. And that's interesting because this is what happens when you do a pulse width sweep. Pulse waves have all the harmonics, but how much of each harmonic depends on the duty cycle. So when you sweep the pulse width, those harmonic levels go up and down. So effectively, by increasing the modulation, we're changing the frequency and at the same time changing the pulse width. This process has turned a pulse wave into a pulse wave, just one with a different pitch and pulse width. It's interesting to see how similar and different the behavior is when compared to the original sine wave. And of course, oscillators can be really quite different in how they respond. And you should definitely break one out, patch it up, and test it for yourself. That's really my goal with that original video, to remind you that this idea of self-modulation is there, just waiting to be played with. It probably just takes a single patch cable, so go give it a try. Thanks for watching.